recognised traits of Asperger syndrome is what people will call the obsessive nature or obsessive tendencies of those that have the condition. For you, particularly growing up in your teens, it was very much Doctor Who.
It was.
At the time, did you see it as an obsession or just that you were in love with a TV programme?
I resented being told I was obsessed. My mother would get to the point where she'd go, "You're obsessed with it," and I think, well, I love it. I love it so much, and it's an escape route. Escapism was the key to it, really. Being able to get in that TARDIS and go off to different planets and different times, and the variety of the sort of stories that could be told because of that format. One week it's a space opera. It could be on a space station fighting aliens. The week after, you could be in the Middle Ages finding a cure to the plague, And the TARDIS, I was fascinated by the TARDIS as a very young boy. I used to hope when I was watching it that someone who'd never been in the TARDIS would go in it, because I wanted to see them get into the big room and go like this. Because I used to think that was hilarious if somebody new went into the TARDIS. So I was making police boxes out of cardboard boxes. My mother once said, "I don't know why I buy you all these things for Christmas, because you spend 10 minutes playing with the toy, and then make a TARDIS out of the box and play with that all day."
You're probably not the first.
So there was that. When I got into my teens, then I became more interested in the way the programme was made. So it wasn't just being entertained by Doctor Who. I was fascinated by the way it was produced, written, directed, the music, the sound effects. I was absolutely absorbed by it all.
But still Doctor Who, as opposed to television in general.
I was fascinated by little bits and pieces about other things. I once sat in on a seminar, I think, that my mother attended on the media. Dr. Malcolm Pittock at Bolton College gave this lesson. And for some reason I couldn't. We're either off school or couldn't go to school. There's some reason why we were all taken to it, And he showed us an episode of Coronation Street. This is in the early 1980s, and walked us through the episode, the way it was written, the way it was shot, the way the camera angles were, right down to the rooftops title sequence and the brass band theme music, and I was absolutely riveted to that. And then we never watched Coronation Street until that lesson. And when we got home, my mum got interested in the storylines that were in the episode that we were shown. And I was watching for the title sequence and the theme music and the camera angles. And so I was interested in television production, but because Doctor Who employed more things because of the nature of it, most dramas don't have special sound effects. They don't have specially composed music. Doctor Who, every new serial that you got, there's new costumes, new sets, a new setting, a different cast, apart from the regular cast. So there's a lot more detail there, a lot more to get into. I got the theme music on a single record, and I was, because the way it's produced electronically, I was fascinated by that. It wasn't produced by a TV orchestra. So you had the composer who came up with the melody, the tune, Ron Grainer, but you had this lady at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, Delia Derbyshire, who created this unusual sounding piece of music using household objects, and sampling them and speeding them up and playing them backwards and things like that to create the sound of the theme tune. So. And then later on in the 80s, when I was a teenager, it was revamped by a different composer called Peter Howell. And I played that record pretty much at least once every day.
And it's not really like a chart single that you can sing along to, is it?
No, although, I can sing along to it. But it got to the point where I needed my fix of that theme tune. And I had to listen to it at least once every day. And I can remember my mother shouting up the stairs, "Will you turn it off?" On one other occasion, she said that she told me to turn it off, and it wasn't on. It had gone into,
into
her
her
brain,
head, poor thing.
It got into her brain that much that, and if she was in the room when it was on, all the neck muscles would go like this. The stress of it, you know, which at the time, when I was 13, 14, 15, I used to think that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Do you look back now and
Reacting
think
to it like that.
perhaps that, you know, you could see how it could annoy someone
Now
or frustrate maybe?
I feel sorry for her now. See, I used to take exception to people saying I was obsessed with it, because people who don't have Asperger's also have their obsessions, but nobody says anything about them. Football amongst men and boys. And I used to say this was my defence at the time. You know, I used to say, look, I go to school and I have to listen about Manchester United and Manchester City and Bolton Wanderers, and it's day in, day out. If you're introduced to a new person, you know, a male, a man or a boy, you know, the first question they ask you as a sort of to help break the ice is, what team do you support? You know, it's on the minds all the time.
Which is as obsessive.
And they'll talk about the players in the team as though they know them personally. You know, they are obsessed with it, but because so many are obsessed with it, it's normal. It's regarded as normal. A science fiction program, and at that time in Doctor Who's history, a science fiction program that was a bit of a cult. It wasn't. It had gone past its heyday at that time, the time I'm talking about. So it was only sort of geeky, nerdy, Aspergic kids who still watched Doctor Who and felt very loyal to it. So the obsession with Doctor Who was a big problem at home. It got at my worst in 1986 when Colin Baker was playing the Doctor. I could be found stood on my own in the kitchen or sat on the edge of my bed reciting episodes out loud. I knew the scripts by heart. And if I couldn't get access to watching it, if my mum wouldn't let me watch the videos, and there was no other way of enjoying it, then I would basically sort of go over an episode in my head.
Have your own version of it.
And my mother was worried. She was worried for my mental and emotional health.
Because, of course, what's important to point out is at this time, you didn't know about Asperger's. It hadn't been clinically classified, and you were nowhere near getting any sort of diagnosis.
No. And because, see, the autistic spectrum, that phrase wasn't flying about, that there's this wide spectrum, and at the thick end of the wedge you've got some autism as people understand it, where someone never speaks, and you can't be sure if they understand, you know, when you talk to them, there's no indication that they even understand what you're saying. There's so much in a world of their own. And then at the thin end of the wedge, you've got Asperger's syndrome, where people are pretty much like a regular person, but they've got these traits that are heightened, such as the social interaction problems and paranoia and social phobia and obsessive thinking and behaviour. In the 1980s, that was not recognised as a condition. You were just odd.
And so the Doctor Who sort of obsessions, if you like, were very much in your teens. When you came out of your teens, into 20s, you were at work, that type of thing, did you have the same sort of feelings, or did you grow out of it?
Did it stop? No. I worked at a soft drinks factory in my early 20s, and I met a lad there. I worked with a lad there who absolutely loved Gary Newman, the synthesizer legend who hits like Cars and Our Friends Electric and We Are Glass. And I picked up on his enthusiasm for Gary Newman and then became obsessed with Gary Newman. And there was one particular time I remember when my mother had asked me to clean the garage out. They'd all gone off somewhere and I cleaned the garage out. So I took my portable CD player and wired it up outside. Lovely summer's day. And the song Our Friends Electric is 5 minutes, the original single. But this was a live album. I loved live albums. And the live version is 7 minutes long because it has a very long intro that leads into it. And you've got this mechanical synthesizer rhythm, this dun 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 dun, and that kind of mechanical rhythm can get on your nerves, you know. If you hear it too much, you know, it's repetitive. It'll drive people mad if they hear too much of it. Well, I played this 7-minute rendition of Our Friends Electric 3 times, back to back, full tilt, while I was cleaning the garage out, and the bit that everyone sort of can get irritated with, the da-da, because I've got Aspergers, I kind of locked into that mentally, and I actually like it, you know. And I'd be humming along to it, da-da. And when my mum got home, she came to see me, and she said, I've had a complaint from one of the neighbours. And I said, oh yeah? And she said, yes, he's neighbour over the road. You played the same song 3 times, back to back, and it 15 minutes, you know. And of course she's not familiar with the music of Gary Newman. She couldn't remember what it was called. And I said, was it Our Friends Electric? And she went, that's it, Our Friends Electric. And I can remember feeling very sheepish and awkward, because I couldn't, there was no answer to it. I couldn't say, don't be ridiculous, or he's being silly, you know. I did.
Because you had done it.
I did play it. It has this monotonous rhythm, heavy. I love the sound of live drums and heavy synthesizers. And Gary Newman's voice is really raw, you know, really raw, almost tuneless. I love that too, you know. So I loved it, but that caused me problems in my 20s.